She stood at the mansion gate, barefoot and broken, her little boy clinging to her side. All she wanted was a job, just enough to feed him and survive one more day. But when the cold, grieving millionaire opened the gate, neither of their lives would ever be the same again. What started as desperation would lead to something neither of them expected. Stay with this story because what happens next will move your heart in ways you didn't see coming. If you are just tuning in, please subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell. Abigail sat on the cracked pavement outside a shut shop, cradling her sleeping son in her arms as the world hurried past her, indifferent. Lagos was loud, restless, a city that didn't pause for the broken. Her wrapper was dusty, her feet swollen from walking for hours without direction. It had only been 3 weeks since her husband Kenneth was buried. 3 weeks since her world collapsed. Kenneth had been everything: her love, her strength, her home. A quiet man with big dreams and a soft smile that made the worst days bearable. They had built a modest life in Surulere. He ran a small printing press, and she sewed clothes from home while raising their son, Daniel. Life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, until the sickness came like a thief in the night. When Kenneth died, he left more than grief. He left her vulnerable. His family didn't wait. Before his body was cold, they had stormed the house. His elder brother Richard claimed everything: the house, the shop, even the sewing machine she used to feed their son. "You are not married to the family," he had sneered. "What belongs to Kenneth belongs to us now." Abigail begged, pleaded. She even brought elders to intervene. But Richard had legal papers. Papers Kenneth had signed long ago in ignorance, giving joint ownership of the property to his brother in exchange for a loan. The elders shrugged. "You should go and start afresh," they advised. "Don't fight a man in his own compound." So she left. There was no time to pack properly, just a small bag, a tattered school uniform for Daniel, and her purse, empty. She moved from friend to friend, but nobody wanted to house a widow with a child for long. Some were kind but struggling themselves. Others whispered that she brought bad luck. She had sold her phone, then her jewelry, even her wedding ring, pawning it to buy food for her son. Now here she was, homeless, hungry, sitting beside a gutter, watching people buy suya and roasted corn like her world wasn't on fire. Daniel stirred in her arms. "Mummy, where are we going now?" he asked in a voice too small for his age. Abigail blinked back tears. "Somewhere better, my son, I promise." But inside, her hope was a flickering candle in a storm. She looked up at the streetlight above her, casting a cold, flickering glow. She didn't know where they would sleep tonight. Not anymore. She thought of the houses she had walked past, grand homes with tall gates and guarded doors. Some had more than 10 rooms, yet she couldn't find space for just one. Maybe tomorrow would bring mercy. Maybe someone would open a door. But tonight, Abigail would hold her son close, hide their faces from the wind, and pray that sleep would come like a gentle thief, stealing the pain, if only for a few hours. The next morning arrived slowly, peeling back the night with the same cruelty that had folded Abigail's life into a box of regrets. Daniel was still asleep, curled beside her like a leaf in the wind, when she made up her mind. Enough was enough. She wasn't going to beg anymore. She wasn't going to wait for another kind stranger who would offer sympathy and nothing more. She was going to knock, not just on any door, but on one of those tall, cold gates that protected Lagos wealth. She would offer herself for work, maid, cook, anything, just for a roof and food for Daniel. Her feet ached as she walked through the upscale part of Ikeja Gra. The air smelled of money and trimmed hedges. She passed 3 mansions before stopping at one with a black gate so tall it almost kissed the sky. It was silent, guarded by 2 lion statues and a distant memory of laughter now long gone. She took a deep breath and knocked. No response. She knocked again, louder this time. A window curtain shifted. Then the gate creaked open, just a little. A tall man stepped out, half-shadowed. He wore a white shirt and ash trousers. His face was clean but unreadable, like a man who had mastered the art of not feeling. His voice was deeper than she expected. "Who are you and what do you want?" Abigail bowed slightly, clutching Daniel's hand. Good morning, sir. Please, I'm looking for work. Anything. I can clean, cook, wash. I'm not begging for money, just a chance to work for shelter. I have nowhere else to go. He stared at her in silence, eyes flicking from her face to the boy hiding behind her. Then his face tightened. No vacancies here. Try somewhere else. The gate began to close. Abigail stepped forward boldly. Sir, please. I'm not a thief. I'm not mad. I just want to work for my son. I will not cause trouble. He's just 7. He hasn't eaten today. Something in her voice cracked, and maybe something in his wall did too. He looked at the child again, barefoot, shivering slightly, clinging to his mother's wrapper with tired eyes. The gate stopped. The man let out a slow breath, like someone who hated interruptions. You can sweep the compound and clean the backyard. That's all, he said flatly. The boy's quarters is empty. You and the boy can stay there. Abigail blinked, unsure if she heard right. Don't thank me, he added sharply. Just do the work and stay out of the main house. And no noise. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, she said quickly, her voice trembling. He turned without a word and walked back inside. The gate closed behind him. Abigail stood still, her hands trembling, her heart pounding. She had knocked, and for once the gate opened. She looked down at Daniel, who was staring up at the tall building with awe. For the first time in weeks, Abigail exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. They had a roof. Even if it came with silence and distance, they had a roof. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the man who opened the gate, David Lawson, was not just a cold, wealthy widower. He was a man running from his own pain, and she had just stepped into the only place he had left untouched by emotion, his heart. The boy's quarters was small, a single room with a rusty fan and creaky door, but to Abigail, it was a palace. That first night, she laid Daniel on a mat, covered him with her wrapper, and watched him sleep peacefully, something he hadn't done in days. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to smile, even if faintly. By morning, she was up before the sun, broom in hand, sweeping the compound as quietly as possible. The house was massive. White walls, polished windows, neatly trimmed hedges, but it carried a silence so thick it made her feel like she had stepped into a place where emotions weren't allowed. She cleaned the front steps, washed the back windows, and scrubbed the kitchen tiles. At noon, the gateman, a round-faced man named Moses, offered her water. Madam, he said with a grin, you sweep like, say, you'd fight with dust. Abigail chuckled. I'm fighting for my son's future. The driver, Emmanuel, tall and quiet, nodded as she passed by the garage. She greeted him with a warm, "Good afternoon, sir," and flashed him a smile that surprised even herself. He didn't smile back, not at first, but the next day he brought her leftover jollof rice from his flask without saying a word. Bit by bit, the mansion began to change, not in its structure, but in its atmosphere. She hummed while she cleaned. She sang softly while washing plates. Daniel followed her around on weekends, asking questions about the house, sometimes sneaking giggles behind the gate with Moses. And though no one said it aloud, even the air around the house began to feel lighter. But upstairs in the main building, David Lawson noticed it too, quietly from behind his glass windows. At first, he tried to ignore it. He was used to silence. He had grown comfortable in loneliness ever since his wife, Michelle, died in a car crash 2 years ago. He had buried not just her, but his laughter, his music, his need for companionship. He became mechanical, distant, focused only on business. But now there was a sound he hadn't heard in a long time. Joy. Not loud, not forced, just soft, genuine warmth. And it came from that woman who had begged him for a chance. He found himself watching her sometimes from the upstairs balcony, the way she bent to scrub the floor, how she comforted her son when he scraped his knee, how she greeted his staff with respect and dignity, even though they technically outranked her. One afternoon, he heard her singing in the kitchen, the same song Michelle used to sing when she cooked on Sunday evenings, a slow, soulful tune about hope rising like the morning sun. David froze in his study, the memory cutting through him like a blade. It wasn't just her voice, it was the presence, the spirit, the warmth he had shut out. Abigail didn't know it yet, but she was stirring something in David that had long been buried. Something fragile, something dangerous, something like feeling. David stood still in the corridor, his hand frozen on the doorknob to his study. The song Abigail had been singing earlier still echoed faintly in his ears. Michelle's favorite. A slow, haunting hymn about surviving storms. He hadn't heard it in years, not since that rainy night Michelle had died, leaving him to a life wrapped in silence and work. How did Abigail know it? Later that evening, curiosity got the better of him. He waited until the sun dipped low, casting golden rays across the compound, then walked slowly to the back veranda where Abigail was watering the flower beds. She turned, startled. "Good evening, sir." "Good evening," he said softly. "That song, the one you were singing in the kitchen, where did you learn it?" Abigail looked down, wiping her hands with her wrapper. "My mother used to sing it when things were hard. It helped her stay strong. I guess it helps me too." David nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "My wife used to sing that song, all the time." Their eyes met for a moment, two souls touched by loss, silently recognizing something familiar in the other. From that day, David began lingering after work. He started asking her small questions about her day, about Daniel's school, about what she cooked. He never smiled too wide, never let his voice rise, but Abigail noticed the shift. One evening, she was sweeping the front steps when he walked out with 2 bottles of malt. "Take a break," he said, handing her one. They sat quietly on the steps like 2 old friends. Abigail told him everything: how Kenneth died, how his family threw her out, how she slept on the street with Daniel, knocking on gates until she reached his. David listened, really listened, the coldness in his eyes melting like butter under fire. "You've been through so much," he said at last, his voice rougher than usual. "I survived," Abigail replied gently. "Not for me, for my son." From then on, David started spending time with them in the evenings. He'd watch as Abigail helped Daniel with his homework, or taught him to dance in the open space by the garden. Sometimes he joined, hesitantly at first, tossing a football to Daniel, or sitting on the steps while Abigail shared stories about village life and noisy neighbors. To Abigail, he was still Mr. Lawson, her boss. She kept a respectful distance, always polite, always aware of the line between gratitude and familiarity. But she couldn't deny the warmth growing between them, a subtle, quiet flame neither of them expected. One Saturday, David did something uncharacteristic. He appeared at the boys' quarters dressed in casual clothes, holding his car keys. "Let's go to the park," he said simply. "You, Daniel, and me." Abigail blinked. "The park, sir?" "Yes. You've earned more than just a place to sleep. Let's give Daniel a real childhood memory." They drove with the windows down, wind in their faces, Daniel beaming from the back seat. At the park, the world felt wide and full of wonder again. They rented bicycles, David helping Daniel stay upright, while Abigail jogged alongside them, laughing until her sides ached. Daniel chased pigeons across the grass while David bought him cotton candy, wiping the sticky sugar from his cheeks like a father would. Abigail couldn't remember the last time she had laughed so freely. David surprised her even more when he joined Daniel on a small bouncing trampoline, laughing awkwardly but genuinely as the boy tried to out-jump him. They raced on foot, with Daniel insisting he won, even though David clearly slowed down to let him. They sat later on a park bench, sharing roasted corn and cold drinks, watching the sun dip low behind the trees. At one point, Daniel leaned on David's shoulder and fell asleep, safe and full. Abigail looked at them, the boy she loved and the man who had once seemed unreachable. Her heart stirred quietly. That day didn't feel like survival. It felt like living. The drive back from the park was quiet, but not the kind of silence that weighed heavy. It was warm, filled with unspoken joy. Daniel sat in the back seat, clutching his new toy car with chocolate smudged on his cheek, humming the song Abigail had taught him earlier. His feet swung beneath the seat, still too small to touch the floor. Abigail glanced at David as he drove. He looked different, more relaxed, his shoulders no longer pulled so tightly, his mouth not as tense. The sun slipping in through the window gave his face a golden softness she had never noticed before. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Today was beautiful. I can't remember the last time Daniel smiled like that." David gave a small nod. "He deserved it. You both did." Back at the mansion, they arrived to find a delivery van already waiting at the gate. Two workers stepped out with bags and boxes. Abigail watched in confusion as they carried them inside. "Sir, what's all this?" she asked, alarmed. "Just a few things I ordered," David said casually. Soon the living room was filled with color: new clothes, shoes, school supplies, and toys. Daniel squealed with delight as he dug into the boxes, pulling out shirts and a tiny backpack with cartoon characters. Abigail, on the other hand, stood frozen. Her eyes landed on the neat pile of beautiful wrappers, modest gowns, and new sandals, all in her size. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I can't accept all this," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm just a maid here. This is too much." David turned, eyes calm but firm. "Call it a uniform," he said dryly. "You can't keep walking around here in clothes that look like they came from a war zone." Abigail stared at him, speechless. He continued, voice lighter now. "Besides, Daniel needs clothes that fit, and a few toys. Let him be a child." She nodded slowly, still overwhelmed. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," David replied, already walking toward his study. But over the days that followed, Abigail's gratitude turned into something deeper. She noticed how David began joining them more frequently. Some evenings he came out to the garden just to listen as Daniel told ridiculous stories. Other times he lingered in the kitchen doorway while Abigail cooked, making sarcastic remarks about her cooking, only to finish his plate quietly later. Abigail found herself laughing more, not forced but freely. The house was no longer a tomb of silence. It had music again, laughter, life. She tried to remind herself of the line between employer and staff, but it blurred more each day. One evening, while they all played Ludo in the hallway, Daniel suddenly blurted, "Mummy, do you think Mr. Lawson can be like my uncle now?" Abigail's eyes met David's. He looked startled, then smiled. A real soft smile. She couldn't answer, but her heart did. Something was changing, slowly, gently, but surely. There was something new in the air. Abigail stood by the window in her small room, folding one of the new dresses David had bought for her. The fabric was soft, elegant. Too elegant for someone like her, she thought. A deep sigh escaped her lips as Daniel's laughter echoed from the garden outside, where David was helping him fly a kite. Lately, the house had become more than shelter. It had become a place of comfort, of warmth, of connection. And in that warmth, something else had begun to grow. Something she didn't plan for. Feelings. Real feelings. She didn't know when it happened. Maybe it was the way David listened when she spoke, or the quiet look he gave her when she laughed too loud. Maybe it was the way he started waiting at the door when Daniel came back from school, just to hear how his day went. But now her heart was restless. She began to wonder, what if people found out? What would they say? That a poor widow trapped a rich widower with sympathy and sweet smiles? That she used her child to gain pity and climbed her way into a billionaire's arms? The thought made her chest tighten, so she pulled back. She stopped waiting at the door in the evenings. She spent more time alone in her room. Her greetings became polite again, her laughter forced. She avoided his eyes. She stopped singing in the kitchen, and David noticed. One night after dinner, he called her to the garden where the air was still and quiet. "You've changed," he said plainly. "You barely talk to me anymore. You're always somewhere else, even when you're standing right in front of me." Abigail hesitated, eyes fixed on the ground. "I'm sorry if I've been disrespectful." "No," he cut in gently. "You've been careful." "Why?" She swallowed hard. "Because I'm scared. Scared of how this looks, of what people might say. You're not just any man, Mr. Lawson. You're wealthy, respected. And I'm a widow who came here with nothing but pain and a child. If people see us together, they'll think I came for your money, that I schemed this. I didn't want to dishonor you." David's gaze softened. He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. Let them talk, Abigail. They'll talk anyway. Whether you walk beside me or behind me. Whether you do good or bad. The world doesn't need a reason to judge. It creates one. She looked up at him then, her eyes unsure. I don't care what they say, he added. I know who you are. I've watched you survive with dignity. Love your son fiercely. Fill a cold house with warmth. Abigail, you didn't take anything from me. You gave me something I thought I'd buried forever. Her breath caught. She opened her mouth to speak, but words failed. So she stepped forward and placed her hand on his. I tried to deny it, she whispered, her voice shaking. But I feel it too. Something strong. Something real. I don't know where it will lead, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel anything anymore. David smiled. Not the smile of a rich man or a grieving widower, but of someone who had just been handed a second chance at life. In the quiet of the garden, with the stars blinking above them, Abigail finally let her guard down. And for the first time in a long time, she let her heart speak freely. The months passed gently. In that time, the mansion changed. Not in size or luxury, but in spirit. Laughter echoed through the once silent corridors. The scent of fresh food often filled the air before the gate even opened. And flowers planted by Daniel and the gardener now bloomed around the compound in wild, cheerful colors. Abigail had stopped hiding. She walked freely now, shoulders no longer heavy with fear or shame. She cooked not just as a maid, but as someone whose presence mattered. She smiled more often. And David? He glowed. The cold, distant man who had once buried his heart with his wife was now alive again. And people noticed. Whispers came, as expected. Some praised, some sneered. But David never wavered, not once. Then one Saturday morning, David gathered them both, Abigail and Daniel, and asked them to go on a short trip with him. The car ride was quiet, peaceful. Abigail held Daniel's small hand in hers, wondering where they were going, but said nothing. When they arrived, David stepped out and opened the door for her. It was a house, a beautiful, warm, two-story home surrounded by trees and sunlight. It wasn't as grand as the mansion, but it was full of life. It felt like a home where memories waited to be made. David turned to her. I bought this house when my wife and I first got married, he said. We planned to raise a family here, but we never got the chance. After she died, I couldn't step back in. I left it empty for years. He paused, eyes gentle. Until I met you. Abigail froze, heart pounding. I want to live again, Abigail, and not just exist. I want a real home again. Not with marble walls, but with warmth, laughter, love. With you and Daniel. Tears welled up in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but David dropped to one knee, holding out a small box. Marry me, Abigail, not because I pity you, not because you need saving, but because I've fallen in love with you, your strength, your grace, your fire. And because I want to give Daniel the father he deserves. I want to build something real with you. If you'll let me. Abigail gasped, her hands trembling. Daniel looked up at her, then at David, then back at his mother, eyes wide with hope. And in that moment, the years of pain, rejection, and shame melted away. All that remained was a heart, hers, that had fought through fire and still had the strength to say yes to love. She knelt beside David, took his hands in hers and whispered, yes. 1,000 times yes. Tears fell, smiles bloomed, and in the quiet of that moment, Abigail realized something powerful. She hadn't just found a room in his house. She had found a place in his heart, and this time no one could chase her out. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed any part of the story, please comment, like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories. See you in the next amazing story.